In this video, we will continue our study of the destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple that occurred in AD 70 as recorded in Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. This is a follow-up video, so if you have not watched part 1, I would encourage you to do so. I will place a link to the first part of this study in the description box. We will continue our study of Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24, which state, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judaea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." In the first video, we discussed verses 20 and 21. In this video, we will cover verses 22 through 24. Let's begin with verse 22 again, which states, "For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." In the first video, we discussed the reason for the desolation of Jerusalem as recorded in Matthew chapter 23, verses 33 through 39. I want to look at the same reference, but as recorded in Luke 11, 48 through 51, which states, "Truly ye bear witness that ye allow the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and ye build their sepulchres. Therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they shall slay and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, which perished between the altar and the temple. Verily I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation." In these scriptures, Jesus is saying that the generation in which he was speaking to would be held accountable for the blood of all of the prophets that had been shed. That is a huge amount of judgment. So the destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple in AD 70 is the fulfillment of these scriptures spoken by Jesus. God's vengeance for the killing of his prophets was unleashed upon that generation. Hebrews 10 verses 26 through 31 states, "For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sorer punishment, suppose ye, shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant, wherewith he was sanctified, an unholy thing, and have done despite unto the Spirit of grace." For we know him that hath said, Vengeance belongeth unto me. I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. If God unleashed his judgment on Jerusalem, what do you think he will do to the rest of the world? These are things that we should really think about and make sure that we understand the severity of sin and judgment. Luke 21:23 states, But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Jesus told them that it would be especially difficult for women who were pregnant and or for those that had infants, because the land would be filled with distress and the wrath of God. The Jewish revolt did indeed fill the land with distress. I will read to you an excerpt from the publication entitled The Jewish Revolt by Osprey Publishing. This publication is a very good summary of the Jewish revolt and includes a lot of very good information on this subject. I will place a link to this publication in the description box. This excerpt describes the famine and starvation that were taking place inside of the city of Jerusalem. The famine was due to the siege, and also prior to that, the Jewish rebels had destroyed the food supply to coerce the citizens to fight the Romans. The excerpt states, The shroud of famine now descended in earnest over the city. Previously, enterprising civilians had dared risk nocturnal excursions into the surrounding countryside in search of food. Now there was no hope of succor, and Titus twisted the knife relentlessly, ordering all those rebels snared outside the walls, crucified in full view of the ramparts. Within the city, the situation grew worse with each passing day. Streets once bustling with life lay empty and silent as the war-weary population subsided into apathy. Amidst all this misery, there was little weeping or wailing, Josephus recorded. Starvation had killed all sense of affection, so that the slowly dying gazed with dry eyes and open mouths at anyone who had passed away before them. With the dwindling reserves of food reserved for the fighters, non-combatants were reduced to boiling straw and drinking the juice. In one incident, hunger drove a woman to such an extreme of madness, she murdered, roasted, and ate her own child. The situation was that there was no food inside of the city, and the Romans were outside of the city's walls and would crucify anyone who attempted to leave the city to obtain food, and they would leave them hanging on a cross for all to see. Due to starvation, there were some in the city of Jerusalem that resorted to cannibalism. This was the wrath of God and the curses for sin and disobedience that were recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 28 being unleashed in full measure upon Jerusalem. This excerpt, which so vividly recorded the events that were taking place inside of Jerusalem, parallels directly with Deuteronomy 28, verses 52 through 57, which outline the curses that would come upon the Israelites for not listening to the voice of God nor keeping his commandments. And it states, "And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, until thy high and fenced walls come down, wherein thou trustedst, throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, throughout all thy land, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children whom he shall eat, because he have nothing left him in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eye shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter, and toward her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear. For she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in thy gates." This is exactly what happened during the Jewish revolt and the siege of Jerusalem. So you can clearly understand why Jesus stated that it would be especially difficult for pregnant women and for infants. It would be an absolutely horrible sight for anyone to have to witness a baby starving to death. And as I previously stated, those that attempted to leave the city for food were crucified. An excerpt from Josephus.org states, "As the construction of the embankments proceeds, the Romans capture escapees from the city, as many as 500 a day. Prisoners are tortured, killed, then crucified before the walls to intimidate the populace. Titus is saddened by the necessity of the crucifixions. So great was their number that space could not be found for the crosses, nor crosses for the bodies. There was death everywhere. People inside of the city walls starved to death, with some resorting to cannibalism. And those that tried to flee the city in search of food faced death by torture and crucifixion at the hands of the Roman soldiers." Let's move on to our last verse of this discussion, which is Luke 21:24, and it states, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Reading another excerpt from the publication entitled The Jewish Revolt by Osprey Publishing, which records the events that took place during the Jewish Revolt, which shows the fulfillment of this scripture, and it states, "The legions gave them no respite. The Roman line instinctively surged forwards, apparently without orders. The rank and file, eager to seize this serendipitous opportunity to consummate more than 3 months' toil and sacrifice. Penetrating the inner court of the temple, the building that had hovered just out of their reach for so long, the Romans gave full vent to their rage and frustration. Even while the temple burnt, Josephus records that looting went on right and left, and all who were caught were put to the sword. There was no pity for age, no regard for rank. Little children and old men, laymen and priests alike were butchered. Such was their frenzy. Many of the legionaries were trampled to death by their own compatriots. By the time Titus arrived on the scene, it was too late to restrain his men, even assuming he had wanted to. This is the fulfillment of the curse of Deuteronomy 28:50, which states, "A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young." And this is an historical account of the Jews falling by the edge of the sword, just like Jesus foretold. The people that survived the siege and killings were led away captive. Another excerpt from this same publication states, "The victors kept 700 of the tallest and best-looking young men for Titus's triumph at Rome. Of the remaining males, those over 17 were sent in chains to a living death as forced labor in Egypt, or to arenas all over the Roman Empire, where they would die in gladiatorial combats, or be fed to wild animals. Women and children were packed off to the slave markets." Josephus says that only 97,000 prisoners of war had been taken in the entire Judean campaign, while 1,100,000 people had died during the siege of Jerusalem itself. The destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple ushered in the times of the Gentiles, which is our present time. This is a basic, high-level review and discussion of the Jewish revolt, which lasted from the years AD 66 through AD 73. If you have never studied the Jewish revolt, I would encourage you to do additional independent research. A good starting point is the publication by Osprey Publishing, which I will leave a link to in the description box. It is a very good read. God's judgment is here, and we are living in a time where we are eyewitnesses to biblical prophecy being fulfilled. For the life of me, I do not understand why people do not have a fear of God. For some, it's likely due to the fact that they have not witnessed His vengeance. We have some very difficult days ahead of us. I would encourage you to watch the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse videos that I posted. There are 4 videos in that series. I will conclude this video with the scripture from Revelation chapter 15 verse 1, which states, "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God."